This episode takes you on a journey through the food and drink of ancient Rome. Here we come. In the great Roman cookbook, De Recocinaria, attributed to the legendary gourmand Apicius, there is a dish that in its day was the undisputed darling of every Roman table, from the halls of the patricians down to the humblest plebeian kitchen. Today, food historians revere it as one of the defining masterpieces of Western culinary heritage. It was the dish you could find sizzling in the thermopolium, the ancient fast food counters that lined Rome's bustling streets. A recipe often hailed as the forefather of the modern hamburger. Its name, Isicia Omentata. The Roman meatball. Now strip away the mystique, and what you have is, at its core, just seasoned ground meat, shaped into hefty patties. But look closer at the details, and you begin to glimpse the customs and hierarchies of the eternal city's dining culture. Take the choice of meat, for instance. In a stark reversal of today's market prices, pork meatballs were far more expensive than their beef counterparts. Pork was the undisputed prestige protein of Roman high society, the meat of choice for banquets and feasts. For Romans, raising pigs served one purpose and one purpose alone: the table. Pork, therefore, represented pure, unapologetic indulgence, a luxury with no other justification. Beef, on the other hand, came mostly from retired draft oxen, old animals worn out from years of ploughing fields and hauling carts. Their flesh was tough, stringy, and carried the unmistakable stigma of a poor man's meal. So even though beef was scarce, it could never earn a place of honor at a proper Roman table. Then there were the spices. The premium version of the Roman meatball called for pepper, an exotic luxury shipped all the way from India, carried by merchant fleets through the Red Sea ports and across the Mediterranean to Rome. But pepper wasn't the only seasoning. The recipe also demanded the fruit of a plant that grew freely across the Mediterranean coast, yet commanded great respect in both the culinary and the medicinal arts: the myrtleberry. These small, oval fruits are typically deep blue-black in color, with soft flesh and tiny seeds. In flavor, they carry a subtle bitterness reminiscent of pepper, a bitterness that only deepens and intensifies during cooking. For this reason, myrtle berries were often paired with pepper, cumin, and honey to create rich, aromatic sauces designed to tame the gamminess of meat. Today, the people most devoted to this flavor are the Sardinians, on an island that was passed back and forth between the Phoenicians and the Romans in antiquity. Sardinia's myrtle liqueur, known locally as myrto, and its myrtleberry preserves are celebrated delicacies across Europe to this day. Finally, there is one more hallmark of the Roman meatball that deserves our attention. To keep the patties from falling apart during preparation, Roman cooks 2,000 years ago turned to an ingenious wrapping: caul fat. Caul fat is a lace-like membrane of fat that sits between a pig's stomach and its diaphragm. Spread it out, and though it is thin as gossamer, it unfurls into an intricate, veil-like lattice, as delicate and elaborate as fine lacework. To this day, it remains an essential ingredient in many traditional high-end dishes around the world. Its purpose is to wrap the meat tightly, sealing in the juices and amplifying the flavor. And here is the truly elegant part. The Roman meatball was made from lean meat, with no added fat. Caul fat, by its nature, melts away entirely under prolonged heat. So by the time the meatball was fully cooked, the wrapping that once held it together had dissolved into the meat itself, basting it from within, enriching every bite. Two purposes, fulfilled in a single stroke. You really have to hand it to those old Roman cooks. What an inspired piece of kitchen craftsmanship. In the story of Roman cuisine, the Lucanica sausage is nothing short of a star. It was the ration that soldiers carried onto the battlefield as Rome's legions pushed the borders of the Republic ever outward. It was the savory companion to fine wine at aristocratic banquets. And it is, remarkably, the common ancestor of countless sausage traditions still alive today. In Italy, in Portugal, and across the entire Mediterranean basin. The name tells you where it came from. Lucania, a region in what is now southern Italy. It encompassed the whole of modern-day Basilicata, along with parts of Salerno, Taranto, and Cosenza. The people who lived there were the Lucanians, an Italic tribe who spoke Oscan. Around the 3rd century BC, as the Roman Republic, founded in the wake of Lucius Junius Brutus's overthrow of the last king, continued its relentless expansion, Lucania was absorbed into Roman territory. But as much as Rome's generals celebrated their victories in the Samnite Wars and the war against King Pyrrhus, the rank-and-file soldiers came home with a prize of their own, the local sausage. One bite, and they were hooked. The flavor lingered on the palate long after the last morsel was gone. The recipe and technique were swiftly carried back to Rome, and the Lucanica sausage had its name. In the 1st century AD, the Roman poet and satirist Martial lavished praise on the Lucanica in his epigrams, extolling its succulent juiciness and lingering savor, before slyly slipping in a bawdy joke about its shape. That bit of ribaldry spread far and wide, and to this day it still draws a knowing chuckle from Italians. As for how it was made, the Lucanica was gloriously indiscriminate in its choice of filling: pork, beef, lamb, chicken, rabbit, virtually any meat would do. The casing, however, was almost always pork intestine, valued for its superior permeability, which allowed for more generous stuffing and a plumper, fuller sausage. For seasoning, commoners and nobles alike reached first for fresh herbs from the fields, rue and parsley being the staples. The difference was in the upgrade. The premium version added pepper, pine nuts, and garum. That holy trinity of Roman upper-class cooking, deployed in virtually every dish that graced a wealthy table. Once stuffed, the sausages were coiled into spirals, then hung above smoldering embers for a long, slow, cold smoke. The finished product was extraordinarily versatile, suitable for frying, grilling, boiling, or braising, and equally at home as an ingredient folded into other dishes. Its flavor was so definitive that the people of Basilicata today still declare, with considerable pride, the sausage we eat now is the same Roman recipe, handed down for 2,000 years. Having explored 2 of Rome's most beloved meat dishes, let us turn now to what the Romans liked to drink. As a civilization that learned from the Greeks and the Etruscans and carried more than a touch of its own romantic spirit, it is fair to say that nearly every liquid in a Roman's cup owed its existence to the grapevines that blanketed every corner of the empire. If money and manners were no object, wine, pure, undiluted wine, would surely have been every Roman's one true love. But constrained by the realities of wealth, shelf life, and social etiquette, a whole family of grape-derived beverages emerged, each carving out its own place in Roman life. Posca was the most iconic among them. In an age when people drank water piped through lead and swallowed gladiators' blood as medicine, Roman winemaking was hardly a model of consistency. Cheap wines, poorly stored, would sour within weeks. But where others saw waste, shrewd merchants and thrifty commoners saw opportunity. They hit upon the idea of blending the soured wine with water, and thus the first generation of Posca was born. It was tart and refreshing on the tongue, though its alcohol content, much like its price, was negligible. Over time, the recipe kept evolving. Some made it with vinegar and water outright. Others infused it with medicinal herbs for a health tonic. In essence, Posca was the Roman equivalent of soda water, a base that anyone could customize to their own taste. The everyman's refreshment. But Posca found its greatest calling in the Roman legions. Soldiers on campaign couldn't afford to drink themselves into a stupor, and natural water sources in the field were often unsafe. Cheap, practical, and mildly antiseptic. Posca became the standard-issue field drink. The military version often had salt mixed in, which helped the soldiers recover their strength after long marches and hard fighting. Given its importance to the army, many a Roman commander made a public show of drinking Poesesca alongside his men. A theatrical gesture of solidarity meant to rally morale and strengthen the bond between officer and soldier. Meanwhile, at the very same time that common soldiers and citizens were raising their cups of Posca, the wealthy classes had found their own grape-based indulgence. Mulsum, Roman honeyed wine. The Greeks, it is said, had long practiced the art of blending honey with wine before Rome ever rose to greatness. The Romans adopted and refined the tradition, eventually elevating Mulsum to a fixture at every proper banquet. It is worth noting, however, that Roman Mulsum was fundamentally different from the mead of the later Norse and Viking traditions, which was fermented entirely from honey. The Romans had no interest in fermenting the honey itself. Their aim was simpler and more immediate, to use the sweetness and smoothness of honey to mask the harshness and acidity of young wine. The standard ratio was said to be roughly 1 part honey to 4 parts wine, enough to lend a pronounced sweetness without becoming cloying, since the nutritional thinking of the day held that sweetness was the most effective appetite stimulant. A cup of honeyed mulsum at the start of a banquet became the universal custom among Rome's upper class. Augustus, the first emperor, a man of famously dignified bearing, was a devoted fan. He reportedly drank mulsum daily and rubbed his skin with Spanish olive oil, considering the combination a recipe for longevity. Nero, on the other hand, was characteristically excessive. He loaded his mulsum with lavish quantities of saffron and cinnamon, chasing after something like a drinkable dessert, an extravagance that was as bizarre as it was decadent. And because mulsum was so deceptively sweet, it had a way of creeping up on the unwary drinker. Before you knew it, the warmth had settled in your bones, and the room had begun to spin. The Romans, ever fond of a good maxim, left behind a warning that still echoes through the ages. For it is a gentle trap, one that sweetens you first, and then lays you flat. Thanks for watching Food Tales. I will see you next time.